Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, it's not midnight. It's 10 o'clock. I'm getting there. Hope you had a great day. I know a lot of you have been watching Sins of Our Mother that dropped at 3 a.m. And I watched about 6 minutes of it, and I had to stop about every 30 seconds to make notes. For those of you who don't have Netflix, so this weekend, a couple of bonus episodes heading your way. Going to go through anything new we find. I'm not going to regurgitate things we already know. The first 6 or 7 minutes were interesting, and can't wait to see what else is on there. Another thing about Valo Daybell, Chad's hearing for tomorrow was vacated. He's not going to be there. I really think this has to do with John Pryor just not wanting him around Lori. That's all I can think. The motion was by Lori's attorneys, but still, if Chad really wanted to see her, he's had a couple of opportunities. So think there's trouble in paradise. So I want to give a big thank you to J.A. on YouTube for the super thanks, and also to Michael and Sherry or Cherie. So I said it both ways because I can't go wrong. I got one right, I'm sure. Watch it be some other pronunciation. They're like, nah, you butchered my name. All right, music fact of the day. Bob Dylan is responsible for some really awesome songs that you may not know of. The first, To Make You Feel My Love, which was sung by Billy Joel, Garth Brooks, and Adele. Hard to tell which one's my favorite, but man, I grew, my teenage years, I listened to the Garth Brooks version, and that one has some special memory. All right. So he also wrote Wagon Wheel by Old Crow Medicine Show, All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix, and also Man of Constant Sorrow from the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I need to watch that again. It's been a hot minute. So I want to give a big thank you to Big E, Eric, Jason Paper over on Twitter. He is sitting in that courtroom. He's a local to this case, and he has been shooting me notes throughout the day during breaks so that I can get this episode ready for you guys. I'm grateful for him. If you like reading all the Valo documents, he's the one to follow. He gets them very quickly, puts them out. It's a passion of his. He is a good dude. Sorry, y'all. I'm trying to get comfortable. I'm all over the place. All right. Also, another one to follow is James Pilcher, and he's doing some coverage from the courtroom. Also today, he posted the ever popular opt-out forum where people can opt out of either being video and audio recorded, or they can choose to be audio recorded. Lots of them are just like none at all. Speaking of which, I have a bone to pick, and I'm going to get off my soapbox after that, and we're going to get started. To me, if you are a public official and you are an investigator or a police officer that rolled up on the scene first, every single trial that I've watched, these guys testify. I understand that this is a huge case. They may not want their picture on, every newspaper that covers true crime, but I do think that law enforcement should have to be on camera. It's accountability and visibility. The biggest surprise for me today was the current sheriff, Tracy Evans, been on the job 2 years, but was there on the crime scenes the day they happened, opted out. The sheriff of Pike County, the current sheriff, he was asked by a reporter, and I will have to go back and find out which reporter confronted him in the lobby and asked, why did he opt out? Only for him to say, no comment. So I'm sorry, tax dollars pay for their salaries. And I've never seen an investigator, a police officer, anybody in that capacity opt out. Of course, I've never seen as much opt out as I have in this case either, y'all. Okay, hand-wise, you guys were asking me today, why are you talking about that hand yesterday? This is what they show if you're not watching the live feed. This is kind of the go-to graphic when somebody doesn't want to be recorded that we stare at for 2-3 hours, sometimes 2-3 times a day. And listen, I could totally work with that middle finger. It's very pointed and it's very long. I have been known to frequent that finger until I started doing true crime and realized I don't want to get killed for that finger. So I don't do it as much. I do it to my brother because he lives across the street and we don't wave. That's how we say hi. But anyways, so I love art, and hands are a big, big, big part of art. Like, they have to look realistic. And I told you I watched Baumgartner Restoration at night to go to sleep, and he is the one that taught me to look for hands. That hand just little wonky to me, y'all. I at the corner of my eye I looked at it, I thought it was a crime scene photo. So I jerked around and it was just that hand. All right. So Big E sent me some information about the testimony. He also sent me some observations from the courtroom. I loved doing that when I sat in trials. Part of my job was reading juries. So I would keep a really close eye on the jury during crucial times in the trial and try to see how they reacted. Were they just indifferent? Were they closed off? Were they looking away? It tells a lot. So one thing he said today, the body photos of the victims were just absolutely vicious and grotesque. It was execution times 8. One juror did turn away when a photo of the bodies was shown. One juror was seen getting very emotional when they showed the body picture of little Chris, who, according to Eric, little Chris still had his glasses on when he was shot dead, and they were still on his face. George IV did not look at any of the bodies, but he was very engaged today. That muscle up there is going to be super sore because that's kind of that little frow he had right there all day. He listened to everybody. I don't think I've ever seen him so invested in any of these hearings, but of course, this is his trial. One time I did see another look from him that was not mean. His dad, Billy, invented the mean look, and he's always had a annoyed look in court. But I think in relation to where he's sitting, he maybe glanced over at the family that was sitting on the front row, the patriarch, bless her heart. And man, you just, you pity her to have to sit there, all of them to have to sit in that room with somebody who knew what was going to happen, because his attorneys are going to tell you he didn't know till the phone call, hogwash. But it did stand out to me when he looked over at what I think to be where the family was sitting. He kind of dropped that mean look. And then when he looked ahead, he had a deep breath and then he swallowed really hard. I'm not going to try to analyze it, but I will say it was the one time in the trial that he didn't have that mean kind of looks mad he got caught. So I don't know. I mean, he's not a saint in my eyes. He doesn't get any brownie points by no means, but there was a different reaction when he glanced over there. The judge said there was no permission to publish any photos of baby Ruger covered in blood. He says there may have been a miscommunication, but he said there will be no pictures of bodies of minors or bloody crime scenes. And what else is he going to limit in this trial? For people like me who do podcasts on this, it takes me until 10 o'clock to try to piece together all these amazing people that are covering the case, and get a timeline to tell you guys what happened. I mean, they're streaming the trial, but they're really not streaming the trial, are they? It's bizarre. So today's testimony, again, was mostly from law enforcement, the first ones on the scene. And the state actually switched prosecutors today. All 3 were in rotation. I think it went a lot better. So some jurors did have reactions to the photos, not just little Chris. So first up was Lieutenant Adam Ball from Pike County Sheriff's Office. He was the first of the day to opt out of being recorded, but when he walked into dispatch the morning of the murders, the dispatcher was trying to comfort somebody, I believe, on the phone. And she told Ball to just get in his car and go west on Highway 32, and she would call and fill him in as he's driving there. And he was first on scene at Chris and Gary's. So when he got there, he said a female, I assume that to be Bobby Joe, told him 2 more were murdered at another location next door, which was Frankie and Hannah Gillies. At Chris Sr.'s, he went inside and observed the bloody drag marks and avoided stepping on them by crawling over furniture and even through a treadmill. So he walked to the bedroom and found Chris Sr. and Gary and checked for a pulse. He said that Chris's head was partially exposed. So he pressed his neck, didn't feel anything, and didn't get any blood on him or anything like that. And it was obvious that Chris was deceased. We knew they were lying kind of on top of each other, covered up with a blanket. They showed unseen photos of the drag marks and photos of the bodies of Chris Sr. and Gary. So their photos on scene were shown, their photos that, okay, let me start this over, y'all. The photos were graphic. Let's just put it that way. Even Evan Millward tweeted that George IV did not look at the bodies on the screen, like Eric said, and showed photos of the bodies, but also at different angles. So they showed pictures of a barn that was searched. Chris Sr. had some property on that barn that they searched. This is some of them there. I'm going to keep those up for a second. Again, I'll put the link in the description. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. So they found an extensive marijuana grow operation on Chris's property, and it included a garage, a semi-trailer, and an outbuilding. Now, Lieutenant Ball says he's definitely seen bigger grow operations around there. And he said it's just not an unusual thing in Pike County to have weed operations. It was professional, it had ventilation. They found 3 separate grow ops on the property. So once he secured that house, Bobby Joe said she was worried there was a third crime scene. So Lieutenant Ball and another officer named Tracy Evans drove to Dana's. He went to Dana's and entered with Officer Mosley, who will testify in just a bit. They found little Chris, who was laying on his stomach facing the doorway. He heard the baby crying and continued clearing the house. They found Hannah Mae laying on her back. She had been nursing the baby, apparently, when she was murdered. And he also saw Dana Roden's body. So he walked out of that residence and secured the scene. So he went back to Chris's house when he was finished there. So on cross-exam, defense says they didn't clear the right side of Chris's house, the area where Gary's bedroom would be. And the reason for that was because he didn't want to step in where they had pulled the bodies. He said he checked for a pulse. Obviously, there was none. The next witness up who opted out, surprise, surprise, Morgan Music, who is a deputy. And he pretty much echoed Lieutenant Ball's statements from that earlier testimony. He stayed at Chris Sr.'s while Lieutenant Ball went to Dana's house. And when Ball came back to Chris's, they searched a garage and they saw blood on a door that was above a garage loft, which had a grow operation. They show a photo of the door and the handle. I didn't grab that. Sorry, guys. It was a small amount. The handle was broken off and on the ground, and the building had a camera on it pointing to the house, but the DVR was gone. So on the screen, on this bottom picture, above where it says Chris Sr.'s property, you can see that camera. And I was wondering, because if you remember when Jake came back in the house and realized that George and Billy allegedly had moved these bodies, he reached in the pocket of Chris Sr. to get the keys for where the grow operations were. I don't know if he was going to grab some stuff or what, or see if there was cash in there. I believe there was a safe or something that was taken. But anyways, so I'm not sure if the broken handle has to do with Jake or if it's a coincidence. They found the wires to that DVR for that camera, by the way. So next up was the sheriff of Pike County, Tracy Evans, who opted out. I don't understand how the current sheriff of Pike County, who is in world news right now, doesn't want to be on camera. It's what you do, dude. He's been a sheriff for 2 years. He was not when the murders happened. That was Charlie Reeder, who is now in prison. That's another story for another day. He was a supervisor at Pike County the day of the murders and decided to go to work when he heard the traffic on the radio about a signal 8, which means a code for an assault. He met Bobby Joe, who was hysterical, saying they're all dead. He went to the porch, and Deputy Ball, who was inside, I believe, Chris Sr.'s house, hollered out said he had 2 bodies inside. They show photos of the body again. He said he handled the search warrants, but pretty soon after, BCI took over. Sheriff Reeder called BCI really quickly into this investigation just due to the scale, the number of victims, how intricate this was. Smart move. He spoke with Bobby Joe again, and she told him there were more victims. So she got in the car with him, and they went to Dana's house. He went inside, and he took the blanket and covers off of Dana and confirmed she was dead. He also saw little Chris's body. The next witness allowed broadcasting. But before we get to him, we're going to do our paid sponsor of the week, Glad Skin. I've got a logo of that up on the screen there. Y'all, I love this stuff. This is easy for me to advertise because it's amazing. If you've been living with eczema, acne, or rosacea, you can relate to the frustration of trying dozens of products over the years with little to no long-term relief. But with Glad Skin, you can expect something different. Did the eczema you had as a kid follow you into adulthood? And living with a visible skin condition like eczema, it can impact your sleep, your confidence, and your sense of self. You deserve better than that, which is why it's time to rethink your eczema treatment with Glad Skin. Skin conditions like eczema, acne, and rosacea affect millions of Americans in the U.S., but the way it's treated isn't working. Glad Skin is rethinking what caring for inflammatory skin conditions looks like by working with your skin, not against it. It's so effective that 91% of users, adults and children both, who've tried their top-selling eczema cream supported significant improvement in just after 7 days. Glad Skin with Micro is a steroid-free, works without harsh ingredients, and it's clinically proven to reduce eczema symptoms, even gentle enough for your littlest little babe. So if you've been frustrated with your treatment options, don't wait and try Glad Skin. They're going to give my listeners 15% off plus free shipping on your first order at gladskin.com/whattheworld. That's gladskin.com/whattheworld for 15% off and free shipping. gladskin.com/whattheworld. All right. So we are going to talk about Tim Dickerson. He allowed to be videoed. Thank goodness. He is the director of Pike County Emergency Management Agency. And so they handled things that would overwhelm local resources in the event of like tornadoes, windstorms, and in this case, the murder of 8 people. So he was home listening to radio traffic that morning on the 22nd and heard a deputy say he had located a deceased person. And that's not unusual to hear, but when he heard they had located a second, he knew something was up and went ahead and took off to go to the scene. He said it took him 30 minutes to get there, and it seems like that's been the common number for EMTs and things like that. It's really scary to be that far away from medical services. He was stopped and said he needed to go to Dana's by the current sheriff, Evans, that we just talked about. Once he was there, he went inside Dana's residence and went into a room and saw little Chris dead. He was laying on his side. He was shot in the back of the head. Big E told me this disturbed him to see this. All of it did, but I think teenagers, it's harder, and just senseless. So he saw Dana, and she was covered in a blanket, and her face was uncovered, so somebody had moved that pillow. With Hannah Mae, she was shot in the front of the head, and the baby was still laying in the bed next to her, kind of nestled between her stomach area and her breast. She was bloody. The baby was bloody. And when asked if there was any evidence the baby had tried to nurse, he said that Hannah's breast was exposed and the baby was right there. There was a noise and the baby's startle reflex kicked in with arms up because he thought the baby was dead at that point too. So I could tell you guys a story about the startle reflex. And this is what I've always heard from my grandmother, not my Grammy, but my granny, Vera, who's no longer with us. The startle reflex apparently is from back in the cave days when, you didn't have bassinets and car seats, just kind of laid the baby on the rock, right? And so if a wolf came or some kind of predator and like nudged the baby, the startle reflex would scare it off. So My kids know that story too. So if it's any different, do not tell them. Don't tell them. That's the one story like they still believe that I told them. So with Hannah Mae, she was shot in the front of the head. The baby was still in the bed laying next to Hannah, and someone came in with him to take newborn Kylie out of the residence. He said the scene was large, and he said it was very traumatic. He was thankful the baby was alive. He said, I just didn't think at first she was. He saw family at the scene, but he didn't have any interaction with them. After he left that residence, he was met outside by Sheriff Charlie Reeder, and he briefed the sheriff on what he knew at the time. He remembers the sheriff say James Manley needed to be interviewed. And I think in the beginning, Bobby Joe was hot on their radar for a hot minute. And I think there was something about maybe a lie detector test, and there were rumors, and poor thing, as if discovering all those bodies isn't enough for anybody to think you did it. Sorry, has to be too much. So BCI was called in, as we know, and he was instructed to work with them since he is familiar with that area. And he didn't go to any other scene that day. Lots of other agencies in the state did offer to send assistance if they needed it. And 2 photos were shown on the outside of Dana's house. It's the same ones that we showed yesterday that show just the trailer from the road. And they showed photos of Dana, Little Chris, and Hannah Mae's bodies also to the jury again. And it sounds like some of these jurors are having a hard time. That's the inside of Dana's house there. And here is the outside. And then what they saw looking in, that's the door. And then you go into a living room area. So they also show a photo of Hannah, her body still in bed. The baby was not in this picture, but her pacifier was. On cross-exam, Richard Nash was up and asks his role in his job, and the witness regurgitates everything he said at the beginning. And the defense says, you're the director. And he says, yep. So here's my theory on this whole jurisdiction thing. I think this might be something they go after and say the trial was held in the wrong precinct or venue or whatever. But Ohio law, because there's some debate about whether Dana's house is in Pike County or not. In Ohio, law says that several crimes that are connected can be taken by one of the counties. In other words, you kind of just agree, hey, you guys take this. And that's what happened in this case. But the different thing that I was looking up today, the search warrants are not part of that law. So I'm curious to see if they go that route and try to say any of this was not done correctly. So the defense says it's important for you to know the boundaries of Pike County. You're familiar with Dana's address? Witness says yes. You're aware her Pike County joins with Scioto County. Pike and Scioto split down the middle of Union Hill Road. And you would agree with Dana's house being in Scioto County. The witness was like, no. So here we go. Gloves on. Defense says, you just agreed with me. The line goes down Union Hill Road, right? The witness says, I'm not disagreeing, but what I know from my experience is Dana's residence is in Pike County. And the defense attorney says, what experience did you base that on? The witness says the conversation that the sheriff of Adams and Pike County had on the day of the homicides. The defense says, so I asked you what your position is because I'm relying on your position as the director of Pike County Emergency Management System. Do you know from that position where the boundary lines are? And the witness says, I know from my position, I've been told in the past the boundary is Pike County. The defense attorney says, and have you independently verified this is in Pike County? And the witness says, I have not been in any position to need to verify that. So on redirect, you said you're privy to the conversation between the two sheriffs as far as Dana's location. And he says, yes. The prosecution asks, what was decided between the two sheriffs? Well, witness says crime scenes, Pike County. On recross, It says, are you aware if Dana's residence is logged into public record for Pike County as a Pike County residence? And the witness says, I'm aware of the conversation. Look, at one point, this dude goes full Zen. Like, I love this picture. I may print it out and put it in here because he had the patience of a saint, but that dude went to another world. I don't know if he was seeking Jesus. I don't know if he was biting his tongue. I don't know if he was meditating, but he took him a moment. I love it. So the defense says, he said, I'm going to ask again, have you seen any public records? And he says, I'm aware of your conversation. And so the defense says, I'm going to take that as a no. And the prosecution objects at this point and says it's badgering. And the judge says, I don't think he gave a direct response to the question asked. Yes, he did. So the defense said, so it's based on a conversation you heard directly. And the witness says, well, there were conversations that day and follow-up conversations, and it was determined to be Pike County. So they just let him off because Mr. Zen did not give in and start yelling. All right, next witness, Gary Mosley. He does real estate now, but he was law enforcement prior to this. He saw a single officer headed that way and asked if he should follow. And they said, yes, they needed everybody to help. When asked how fast they were going to get there, he said, well, we wasn't moving slow. I love it. Well, we wasn't moving slow. As they approached the house, he saw people through a tree line running towards them. And it was Dana's brother, James Manley, who was flagging them down. And this was at Dana's house. And James said they could hear a baby crying inside the house. And, you know, people have asked me why. Yesterday, I said I don't fault him for not going in there to get the baby. And I'll tell you why. I've had about 8 people literally inbox me about this. And it's okay. Like, we all can have our different opinions. My opinion is this. Like, our body is equipped with this really awesome thing called fight or flight. And sometimes we don't get to choose what our body does. So if somebody comes up to me threatening, I can say in my mind, I would totally go full ninja and make them regret the day they walked up to me. But my body may say, we're running. Sometimes you don't have control over that. Not to mention, this poor guy had seen his nephew and his fiance with their faces totally blown off. And not only that, he goes into his sister's house and realizes his sister's been murdered. I think it's safe to say, aside from fight or flight, which, you know, thank goodness we have it. It keeps us alive sometimes. Also, trauma is a very difficult thing, and trauma is not a gradual thing. Trauma can be instant. And I think that James was instantly traumatized and didn't know if there was a shooter in there. Maybe he just did not want to go in there and see Hannah Mae murdered. So that's why I said that yesterday. If you disagree, I'm cool with that. Hey, if we were all the same, it would be so boring around here. It's good to have different opinions. I love discussing them with civility all day long. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what you stand for. If you're nice to me, we're good. So he knew what was going on in the area due to listening to the radio the whole way up there. So he pulled in that residence, and him and Deputy Ball walk to the door, and they go in to clear that residence. So Mosley was told that this could be an active shooter situation, so they had to go room to room. So he walks through, and he tells how they cleared each room. There were some pictures that I did not see. So they went to little Chris's room first, I believe Hannah's second, and then Dana's. These pictures obviously weren't shown. They hear the baby crying, and he points out on the diagram to the prosecutor where he heard that crying from. If you remember yesterday, there was a little something by the defense attorney about the hallway that you have to go down to get from Dana to Hannah's room. I don't know how that's going to come in, but this is the second time that that hallway comes in. Or can you see straight into Hannah's room from Dana's? So they show a picture of Hannah's room, and he said he looked and kind of stepped inside. They needed the EMTs to come in for the baby who took the little newborn out. Then they went into Dana's room, and they see her covered in her bed. He helps set up tape line and was called to another residence. So I don't know if this is the actual order that they went to the scenes, because we had heard that Dana was uncovered and the pillow was taken off. So they went into Dana's room. We said that. He helps set up the tape line. He goes to another residence, which is Frankie and Hannah Gillies. He didn't enter the whole house at that time. He just peeked in. And here's the thing. He had some wipes in his car that he says he keeps on him. Just, you dealing with people all day, and they might have cooties. You don't know. So he keeps wipes in his car. And he did wipe off baby Ruger a bit. I don't know if they're going to make an issue about that, the defense, but he went on the front porch and looked inside, which opens up to a living room. And he said it was pretty dark in there. So on cross-exam, the defense asks about the photo looking into the bedroom where Hannah Mae and the baby were. The defense clarifies he didn't take the photo, but this is the angle where he was standing, and asked how many steps from Dana's doorway to Hannah's room. And the guy's like, I didn't count, but he estimated it to be around 6. The defense asked if he went alone in the basement to clear it, and the witness says yes, it would have been super unsafe for the both of us to go. Should there have been a shooter down there, there would have been two dead officers. He said there was a direct line of sight from the doorway to the bed, talking about from Dana to Hannah's, I assume. It was hard to hear. So as you walk down the hallway, your line of sight will show more of the room as you approach it. The defense asked, do you have line of sight into this room? And he says it would be dangerous without this area of the living room being secure, and the witness agrees. He said the windows were closed inside, and the only place he needed a light was a basement because it was morning. The last witness for today was Miranda Cable, who was an EMT in 2009. Now, let me just tell you, girl boss right here. She knew what she wanted. She did it. EMT in 2009. She was an advanced EMT in 2011. And went on to get her nursing degree in 2020 and her bachelor's in 2021. You go, girl. That's awesome. So April 22nd, 2016, she was dispatched to Union Hill Road at 8:13 a.m. She thought they were responding to a possible domestic violence situation, and there may or may not be somebody dead on scene. Could be an assault. At that point, they didn't know. There were 2 units already on scene. Later on, another one was sent. So they arrived at the first residence, which is Frankie's, and they were told that there were more locations down the road. So they left and went to Chris Sr.'s, and whoever was in charge of that residence said they weren't needed. So an officer said there was some alive down the road, so they went to Dana's house. There was a unit on scene, and she said she saw an EMT come out with the newborn. He said he didn't need help, so they returned to the second residence, where the officer said, it's the same one. The officer said, you're not needed here. The prosecutor said EMT Justin Waring, who testified yesterday and allowed himself to be on camera, was traveling right behind them coming to the residence. And there was a 10-minute difference in their arrival times on their report. So the prosecution wanted her to clarify why. And she said she didn't chart until they had stopped, because they had been so many places in a rapid succession that she didn't have time to clock in what time she actually arrived on scene. From there, they were all told to go stage by Sheriff Reeder, and they were staged on a gravel road between the second and third residence. Now, here's the problem. They don't show first, second, and third residences on screen that I've seen, so it's hard to tell, but I do believe... No, I'm not even going to go there from memory. Numbers, y'all. You know me. So while staging, they were asked to go back to the first residence to transport Ruger to the hospital, which is Frankie's little baby. They had contact with Ruger at 11:08 a.m. and at 11:16, they had left with him. They checked him out, put him in an ambulance, and took him to Adams County Hospital. And the reason they wanted him to go there is because that's where the other babies were. And they wanted him right there in one spot. Ruger had blood all over his body, but she didn't know if anyone tried to remove the blood. And we know the EMT did. And I don't fault him for that. It's an odd thing to see a baby covered in blood. And I know it's part of a crime, but they didn't bust him on it. So I'm glad. Ruger, the reason that they transported him actually was they had concerns about possible hearing loss being that close to the shots. And also, if you remember in that picture yesterday, I'm not going to re-show it because the judge today said he didn't allow it, and I'm not going to re-show it. That he had that clotted blood in his ear. So they were just worried maybe he had a ruptured eardrum from all that. And there was no cross by the defense on her, and that was basically it. So I really hope tomorrow more people opt to testify, because it makes my job a lot easier. Trying to piece this together from 50 different sources will make you want to bang your head against a brick wall. I haven't got there yet, but we're 3 days into an 8-week trial. So we'll talk later. Anyways, I'm going to watch Sins of Our Mother and at least one episode before bed. And then don't forget, this weekend, we're going to have a bonus episode. I'm thinking about maybe having Eric on with me at some point during this trial. He's going to be going back and forth. It's always fun to have somebody on that sits in that courtroom and can tell you little snippets, and you guys could ask questions. And I had told him before he went, it's going to be very surreal to be in that courtroom of a case you have followed for 6 years. Every time I went into a case, when I went into the Colorado theater shooter case, to be in the same room with that guy, knowing what he did, was so surreal. And I sat right behind him and I could smell him. And so it's very weird, and he's enjoyed the process. It does get monotonous in there. Even in your biggest cases, you think, I can't wait for this case to get started. I'm going to be there every second of every day. You do get bored in there sometimes. It can get very technical when you're talking about cell phone pings and how they ping or things like that. But I'm glad Big E got to go. He came in the clutch today for us with some notes. So thanks again, Big E. I'll see you guys tomorrow. We will do another day of testimony. Hopefully, we'll have enough to do some testimony. And if not, maybe we'll do Sins of Our Mother a little early. Who knows? All right, guys. Hope you have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.